Hello there, Ray here, and I am proud to say that one of the largest projects that I have ever worked on is finally finished. Beacon in a Box. Beacon in a Box is a machine that consists of three main smaller machines. Those are the Sandcidiator, Withergrave, and Star Extractor. I have already made an explanation video explaining these three individual farms. There is a link in the description to each of these videos, so be sure that you watch these videos before you watch this one, therefore you can understand what is going on in this video. For the most part, I will be explaining how I combine these three farms to make Beacon in a Box, and I'll also be going over any tweaks that I made to the individual farms along the way. Beacon in a Box is a machine that automatically produces beacons as you AFK. The items still need to be assembled into a beacon, just as the name Beacon in a Box refers to the contents of a box, such as you can get mac and cheese in a box. Even though mac and cheese is in the box, it still needs to be assembled. And just as in Beacon in a Box needs soul sand to be added, mac and cheese needs water to be added. This world here that I built Beacon in a Box in is based off of a real world, so just with a few tweaks you can actually build this very same thing into your very own world. We are currently here in the spawn chunks, near the world spawn. The first thing I'm going to show is the Withergrave, which is in the nether. The nether portal over there is linked up with the spawn chunks, and down this rail we come to the Withergrave. The Withergrave is located inside a bounding box of the nearest nether fortress to there. There's actually another fortress over here, but I have chosen this nether fortress since it is closer to a specific bedrock formation behind it. I'm here at the center of the Withergrave farm, and I'm just down by all the storage, and I've added in a switch that turns on the gas conveyor belts. And this is just a switch that runs up this torch tower here, and it will turn on these gas in perfect timing so that they are synchronized to come in and push each mob in at the right amount of time. And when you leave the farm, it's important that you shut off the gas conveyor belt, otherwise it's potential that one side can unload before the other side, and this will allow them to be not synchronized anymore. On the other side here we have the on and off switch for the soul sand dispensing. So if we turn this on, this just runs down here and normally locks this hopper and prevents skulls from falling down into this chest. So once this minecart chest reads a certain number of skulls in there, it will take off and deposit 3 skulls down at the spot where we have the withers being summoned in. And at the same time, it will also come along and just activate a small clock here, which will just come up and come through all this wiring and eventually end up where the player will be AFKing, which is over here by this dispenser, and I'll just dispense him 4 soul sand. Since there is no communication wires going out towards the star extractor, this is a simple way to prevent the player from here from placing more soul sand than there is actually skulls to summon in the withers over there. This is why I did it this way. Before you start AFKing, you will want to set all your dogs up, because when you come into this area you will want all your dogs to be sitting down. I recommend you have a lot of dogs on the edges. The more dogs you have around here, the faster they will kill the wither skeletons. There are some bugs in 1.8 that mess with your dogs getting up and teleporting to you. So sometimes if you start walking towards this farm, even if your dogs are sitting, they will try to teleport to you. If you're having this problem, I recommend just having another portal that takes you directly to this farm. And it seems like that kind of solves the problem. And then you just travel in the overworld to this nether portal, and then hop into this nether portal, and then you come directly to the center here. That way you won't have to worry about your dogs teleporting. In the center here, I have also added a ocelot. This is name tagged. This allows the chicken jockeys, once the baby pigmen, they'll get suffocated in here, then there'll just be a chicken left in here. And the ocelot comes along and will kill all the chickens. That's why I have an ocelot in here. The majority of lava slimes will die while falling through these shifting floors. And then they will come down here, and if they manage to live through going past this crusher right here, they will end up down here. And here they will be able to hop around, and if they happen to jump right when this thing opens up, they will crush and die. Otherwise they will start tracking towards the player, and they can actually manage to fit through this trapdoor and this repeater here, this gap here. They can actually manage to fit through here. So that's why there is a second wall over here. This small gap here allows XP to come through, but it prevents the lava slimes from getting through. So if you run this farm for a long period of time, you might have some lava slimes that are hopping right here trying to get to you. Even though all the XPs seem to have the same kind of hitbox, there's actually some XPs that are bigger and some that are smaller. The smaller XPs just come from normal mobs without any armor or weapons on, and the bigger XPs come from mobs that are holding armor or weapon. And the smaller XPs can fit between the top slab and another block. They can actually squeeze through there, but the bigger XPs cannot. So that's why I had to use a trap door here to allow the bigger XPs to get through. But this also lets lava slimes through. But over here, the gap is actually narrow this way, and this allows the big XPs and the small XPs to get through, but not the lava slimes. The length of this killing chamber is 11 meters, and this is just small enough so that the player, if he stands here, he's able to collect XPs even from the far corners of each side. What prevents this method from being infinitely automatic is the problem is that the dogs can eventually die. The way this happens is that when wither skeletons are spawned in, they sometimes can spawn in normal skeletons with them, and when they come down here, they can also spawn in with a chance of having armor, and the armor can also have enchantments of thorns on it. And if they happen to come down here and they don't die very quickly, or if they don't die from the crushers and they instead die from the dogs could attack them and take damage from their thorns armor. And if that's why I recommend that every once in a while that you just take the rotten flesh that comes from the zombie pigmen and just feed your dogs. But if you would want to avoid this situation altogether, I recommend just putting one of these type of crushers just above the one here. And this just allows the mobs that are too high to get crushed before they get sent down into this chamber. The repeaters down here on the floor are just here to allow the baby pigmen to be slightly taller, and this way they will suffocate in this crusher along with all the other mobs. When you're ready to leave, you want to be sure that you have all your dogs sitting, and this ocelot is also just big enough so he cannot fit through his trapdoor, so you don't have to worry about him escaping. If you're using this method where you have the withers summoned at the same time that you're operating the wither grave farm, you'd just be AFK here, and you'd be just holding down your right click button, placing soul sand. And in here is the dropper that gives you more soul sand, and this is just a chest that holds all the extra soul sand, and there's a hopper there. And the way you would do this is you would be facing here, and then you'd hold down your right click button, and if you want to AFK, you could just hold down your right click button, and there's different methods that you can use to actually be able to leave the screen and still have your character holding down the right click button. The one that I usually use is where you hold down right click button, then you press F11, which puts you into full screen, and as it's zooming out into full screen, you release your right click button, and then once it is in full screen, you can push F11 again and put it back into the normal screen, and then you can just tab out by using Alt Tab. And there's other methods that you can use to do the same thing. Down here where all the items are stored, they are picked up by these hoppers, and there is some hoppers that pick up directly underneath them, as well as underneath of these dogs here. Just in case the item would slip through here, these hoppers will pick them up. And the hoppers kind of split off and they go both directions. This kind of just increases the number of items that can come out per minute. And if you're operating this farm, say with a sword, then you get quite a few items, so it's important that you have enough places to store them. I also added in a couple extra hoppers to store some more items. So down at the very end, after it stores all the typical items, down here it stores the non-stackable items. So this will be like the swords that come from the wither skeletons and the bows that come from the normal skeletons. You also get some armor in here and whatever else not. Sometimes you get some zombies, so you might get some iron ingots in here. And if these fill up, then I have an override system. It's just a dropper that will drop them into this lava. If this whole stack of chests here fills up, you don't have to worry about it backing up and filling up all these other chests and locking the whole system up. So that's why I got this system here. I got one for each corner just to prevent overflow. So for the beacon in the box, I have the first and the second columns being the wither skulls and the coal. And what I have down here, right after they come through the chest, instead of just getting stored, I have it so that these hoppers pick them up. And so the wither skulls will actually get pulled around, and they'll eventually come all together and get deposited into this chest. And the coal also gets pulled out, and it gets pulled around and deposited into this chest over here. And this chest also picks up the nether stars. Let's see how fast these dogs can kill about 75 wither skeletons worth here. And this is about one mob cap worth of wither skeletons. So I'm just going to put a command in that will make all the dogs sit back up again. A little bit of lag. Wow, they're killing them really fast. Doesn't take no time. So to prevent mobs from spawning on the rail, and also in this area when the chest minecart is gone, I just have a slab here, and this allows the minecart to go ramp up there, but also prevents the mobs from spawning there. And I also have this fence gate here, and that prevents mobs from spawning there when the minecart is gone as well. And I also get everything else spawn proof down here just to prevent mobs from spawning down here and holding up the mob cap elsewhere. So once the chest minecart here gets enough skulls, it will just flicker this gate here, and this will allow the chest minecart to take some skulls up, and it'll just keep taking them up over here, and this is going towards the direction of a specific bedrock formation, which I talk about in the star extractor video. And this just happens to be the location, so I have to take the skulls over here to make it work. And then what the chest minecart does is that he just goes over here and goes over top of 3 hoppers and drops off 1 skull on each hopper, and then he just turns around and goes back on the same rail and just goes back to his normal sitting area. So each of these hoppers go to a different dispenser over here, and each of these dispensers are one of the dispensers that dispense a skull onto the soul sand once it is in the correct formation, and that's how the star extractor gets the wither summoned over here. So at the same time as the chest minecart is coming and dropping off those wither skulls, the player will also be given those 4 soul sand, and they just travel along this conveyor belt. And this conveyor belt just brings the soul sand from when the player is all the way up and takes it into here where it makes the formation of the wither skeleton. And when I use this vertical elevator here, I just happen to use a different type here. And this one's kind of a little bit different, where the soul sand comes up from one side, and then once there is soul sand occupying the space here, it will allow this comparator to read the item that is behind the soul sand, and with this case it happens to be a cake. And cakes are non-tile entities, so they cause less lag. And then once the soul sand gets pushed over here, the same thing happens, and it just powers this piston and pushes it upwards. And then when another soul sand comes in, and then a third one comes in, then the center one is moved inward. And then when the last soul sand is pushed in, the skulls are placed in, and once the skulls are placed in, the wither is summoned, and he's summoned at the point of where the bottom piece of the soul sand is. So let's just say this is like the tail of the wither, and this is where he is spawned in. And then once he is here, he just spawns upwards, and he will automatically be spawned within the bedrock here. This bedrock formation that I'm using right here is at X 337 and Y negative 32. And this was found for me by Wout 12345. So for the wither to actually take suffocation damage, he has to be in an entity processing chunk. And since the player is AFKing way over there, he's actually out of range, and he is not loading this as an entity processing chunk. So what I have here is a bunch of hoppers, and this is right on the edge of the chunks that are loaded by the player at a render distance of 8. And here it just pulls from those chunks and just starts loading these chunks over here. And this is a 5x5 area that's loaded, and this just allows the wither to be entity processing chunks, and therefore he will start taking suffocation damage and die. It takes exactly 5 minutes for the wither to die from suffocation damage. This is one of the points where you cannot use Optifine. It's really important that you do not use Optifine, because Optifine actually prevents these pseudo-generated entity processing chunks for the mobs to actually take suffocation damage. So there's a few cases where Optifine is not like vanilla survival, and this is one of them. Since the wither over there is targeting this chicken, if there happen to be a pigman jockey that spawns here, it could be possible that the wither will start targeting the pigman jockey's chicken that is over here. And in this case, the distance in which the player can allow mobs to spawn is over here, and that's why this is all slabbed up to prevent mobs from spawning. But there comes a point where the player is too far away, so mobs won't spawn back here. So Just by using this distance is an easy way to prevent mobs from spawning in this area. The chicken here and this glass and this piston, this redstone, are all at the very most bottom level of the bedrock here. So you would have to find a 8x1 area to place this in if you wanted to use the same type. When the wither dies, there are these hoppers here. I'll just pick up the star, and when the wither eventually dies, the hoppers will just allow the star to fall down into this minecart here, and eventually the minecart will get enough stars where it will be able to trigger this fence gate here, and then it will take off down this rail. By putting a trap door here at the very top level, I was able to make a bi-directional rail. This just means that the minecart can go both ways without getting stuck, but also make it mob proof, since mobs cannot spawn in an area if there's a trapdoor at the very top part of it. So when the minecart finally does get full enough to move, it can just go down this rail, and it will take it all the way over here near the wither grave farm, and here it will just come over to this hopper, and this will just allow it to dispense the items it has into this hopper here, and then it'll just take back off and then end up at that station over there. If you happen to leave the area without shutting the wither grave off and it unloads like this, then the gas will pile on top of each other. To fix this, all you have to do is come in to the switch where that turns the gas conveyor belt off and just turn it on for a bit and then shut it back off, and this should allow enough time for the gas to get swapped around. So this gas will just end up at its far location, and then these two will just swap, and then they'll get fixed again. Once the nether stars get deposited into this hopper chain here, it'll hook up with the coal hopper chain, and both the hopper chains will go over here, and they'll just dispense both of the items into this minecart here. And once it reaches a certain signal strength, it will just let this chest minecart here take off. Currently, inside this minecart here, we're just picking up the coal. This is just used to go to the spawn chunks, and it just used to fuel the furnace array, and this will just cook the cobble and the sand into glass and smooth stone. But if you also are killing blazes by hand, you also get blaze rods, so you can also have blaze rods go into this container and also take them to spawn, so you can also have them to fuel your furnaces. Once this minecart chest here has enough items to allow it to take off, the fence gate there will just flicker, and then the minecart will just travel along these rails until it gets to the nether portal, which takes you to your spawn chunks. And at this point, the chest with the items will just go through the nether portal, and it will continue going on to the rail, which is on the other side. So here you can see it going through. Just like the hoppers over on the other side, which are loading for the star extractor, here I have an array of hoppers that are pointing into the next chunk, and they have an item inside of them. This just allows the chunks which the player are loading to continue through as pseudo chunks. And here I am loading a 5x5 area that is continually going this way, and this just allows this rail here with the chest minecart on it to be entity processing. That way it does not get unloaded in lazy chunks. So it continues through this entity processing chunks until it reaches this nether portal, which it will teleport through into the spawn chunks. And once the minecart is done unloading, it'll just come back and go back to its sitting station over there. Since I made this for single player as well as multiplayer, in single player, once your character is sitting here in the nether or in the end, the overworld usually gets unloaded. So the way we keep the overworld loaded is by having some chickens over there which are laying eggs, and then the chicken eggs are just dropped through this nether portal on the overworld side, and they will come out here and they will just keep the overworld loaded. And this allows the such as the chest minecart, when it reaches here and it goes teleports into the overworld, it can unload and then come back without having a player having to be in the overworld. And when the eggs are shot through the nether portal, I just have some fire here which will just destroy the eggs so you don't get too many and cause extra lag. If you were wanting to do the same type of setup as I did here, where you have the spawn chunks nether portal right next to the wither grave, which is right next to the star extractor, you would probably want to know the locations of the different bedrock formations that you could use for the star extractor that are somewhat near your spawn chunks. and then try to find a nether fortress that has a bounding box that is somewhat near your spawn chunks as well. Otherwise, it is just as easy to use each of these individual farms by themselves. So you could just use this by itself, and then use the star extractor by itself, and then when you're done, you can just ship all your items over there to your spawn point. Now that I came to the nether portal, you can see that the tracks continue going through. So when the chest minecart comes through this nether portal, he'll keep his momentum and the direction, and he will just continue falling along this rail. And here's another unloading station where he will unload his items, which are coal and nether stars, into this here, which will just drop them out into this water stream. You can see here on the back side of the nether portal, we have a dropper that is just dropping the eggs into the nether portal, keeping the overworld loaded. And here we have enough chickens to supply the eggs, and a chicken will lay egg about every 7.5 minutes. So they're just coming down and being dropped into the nether portal, and this is being done about every 40 seconds just to keep the overworld from being unloaded. The overworld usually unloads from about 1 minute after the player leaves that dimension and goes into the nether or the end. But since it's being loaded by these eggs being dispensed into the nether, the chickens themselves are actually entity processing loaded and since they're in spawn chunks, and therefore they are allowed to lay more eggs and continue the cycle. So when the coal does get dispensed out of this dropper here, it will just get aligned against these cakes here, and then it will just get taken in by these item sorters here, and this will take the coal and it will store it in these chests if it's not already being used by the furnace here. Same thing goes for the stars. They get aligned by the cake and then they just move over until they come across the item sorter, which has the sorting out of the nether stars, which is just this one here. So before you go off and AFK at the Sandcidiator and get the obsidian and the sand, you would probably want to pick up some coal, maybe fill up some of these chests so that you can have this running as you're at the Sandcidiator. Right here I have a command block, so when you get this world download you could teleport yourself directly to the end portal. Otherwise, I'm just going to travel there manually. So the next machine we're going to look at is a Sandcidiator, which the sand would be flying out of this open fence gate here, and it would just be having an arch and traveling down under through this hole here and underground, and then the sand would end up landing right here and it would start getting pushed along this conveyor. I built this conveyor underground so that you could easily hide it underneath the world and you wouldn't have to worry about making your spawn chunks look too ugly. One thing I did change about the Sandcidiator was this sand conveyor here, and I just swapped the clocks out that were on these for a simple pushing mechanism so that when the sand is placed here, it is powered this redstone dust here, which powers this block. It pushes this piston out and it continues this all the way along until it reaches its destination. And the reason why I couldn't use a clock here was because it was actually getting the sand to be at a different synchronized speed at which I needed to use, and since I made the Sandcidiator be able to operate the sand generator without an autosave detector, I had to use this method. And I'll talk a little bit more about why I can make this operate without a autosave detector using this method. So the sand leaves the spawn chunks, and the entity processing spawn chunks are these bluish ones here, and these orange ones here are the lazy chunk spawn chunks, and as I get to the edge of the lazy chunk spawn chunks, I use the hoppers to load the next chunk. So these are all lazy, pseudo lazy spawn chunks, and I just continue this all the way until I get to the end portal. In areas that you happen to load with your player that also contain the sand conveyor belt, such as the end portal or your spawn chunks, you probably should cover up your sand so that the endermen do not take it. As we reach where the entrance end portal is, the sand just keeps getting wound around, and then it gets pulled up with this mechanism, which is just a vertical sand pusher that I made, and I have another vertical sand pusher I have here. And in this spot you can see that this is a area that is loaded with the same hoppers that came from all the way from spawn, and it is in a 5x5 area. so that the center one is this whitish color, and this is just a pseudo entity processing chunk. So then when the sand comes up here and the sand gets pushed into the entrance end portal, it will be able to be entity processing and allow it to be an entity and fall down and duplicate in the portal. Back here is the silverfish spawner, and this comes with the stronghold. And there was actually an entrance end portal here, but I have removed all the entrance end portal frames. I've also moved the entrance end portal portal blocks, and this is all possible in survival, and I've actually made some videos about showing how you can do this. The first sand generator that I made for the Sandcidiator was this slime block one here. And this sand generator worked just like the other sand generators, except it would push the sand block in from the side. And the only problem with this one is that right at the time that this entity processing chunk would become unloaded from the autosave, there could be a chance that it was in a very risky situation where the slime block was sticking out, and then the slime block would be out here and the entity would be falling down, and then when it became lazy chunk, it would just remove the entity of the falling sand, and it would allow it just to become a block, and it would sit right here on top of this slime block. And this would prevent the piston from being able to grab the slime block, and it would break the system. So instead I went with a simpler method where if a sand comes up here, it will retract this piston, and then the row of this sand blocks will push the falling sand entity and allow it to fall down with a slight momentum in this direction, which it will clip onto this soul sand block and duplicate once it goes through the portal. If you happen to start the sand conveyor belt in a sequence in which one sand happened to be falling right during the autosave, the sand that is falling as an entity will be placed back up here as a block. And this is why you might see that there is another block here on top of the piston. That is what actually happened. And this is actually very helpful because this prevents the sand from clogging up the system and preventing more sand from coming through. So now I'm here in the end, and I currently have the end platform set up to spawn in the withers and start the Sandcidiator. So one of the things I changed about the Sandcidiator is that I removed the other lever and just added in a repeater line here. So now you just hit one lever and it just activates the entire wither cage sequence here. So I'll just turn it on and we can watch it. So the first thing it does is that it summons in that wither, gives it that water, and it also puts in its iron golem. Then the timer comes around, and when the timer is up, then I'll just, after the explosion goes off, it'll push in the boat and this wall here. And this just allows it to happen all at once, so you don't have to activate two levers. So as the startup sequence is going on, the sand is coming down and is getting pushed into the system at a very specific timing. And then once the sand reaches all the way around in the overworld and comes through the entrance end portal, it will just reset this platform, and then the whole farm will start up. And it'll just continue like this until you shut it down. The Sandcidiator is made up of about 3 smaller machines, first being the machine that pushes the sand off the platform. There is one here, and there's also one over here, and these are limited to about pushing 1 sand off the platform per second. The second smaller part is the withers and the wither cages themselves. And since the withers can only be damaged so often, or else they will shoot off blue wither skulls, they are limited to being damaged about once every 60 game ticks. But since we're alternating between withers, we can damage them in a amount of once every 30 game ticks. This means that we can damage a wither about once every 1.5 seconds. This precise timing of how the withers summon their blue wither skulls was looked up for me by Myren Eario in the code. The third part is the actual conveyor belt that has the sand moving all throughout. So after the sand falls through the wither, it ends up down here, and this is just a system that pushes the sand along. And then both sands come to this spot where I have a device that will pull them and push them upwards along this area, and they will eventually go into the overworld and then back around into the end again, making a huge loop. This sand conveyor has a limit of about 1 sand per every 0.5 seconds. So out of the 3 parts of the Sandcidiator, the slowest part is the withers, and since they can only take in damage about every 30 game ticks, but even though that is the slowest part of the entire farm, I actually currently have the farm running out at about 1 sand every 50 game ticks, and this is a pretty safe speed to be running the farm at. The reason why I am running the farm at 50 game ticks per sand instead of 30 game ticks per sand is because my system here is actually being ran without having any autosave detectors in it. So that means that you can start this farm up at any time you want, and it doesn't rely on when the game autosaves. The biggest drawback to using such a system is that when the sand goes through the sand conveyor belt, it goes into the overworld, and it goes away from the spawn chunks and ends up in the pseudo lazy chunks that are loaded, and it happens to be in there while there is a game autosave going on. All those sand that are in that system being moved will stop for 1 game tick as the rest of the sand continues to move. This could cause problems in the long run because one sand could always end up hitting this autosave, and he could eventually keep slipping backwards until he arrives really close to the same timing as another sand. So in that case, 2 sand may come into the system which a timing is less than 30 game ticks, which would be a problem. The way I got this sand conveyor to work without detecting when the game does its autosave is by having this entire loop of the sand conveyor belt being a factor of the time in which it takes the game to do its autosave. What this means is that the time it takes 1 sand to go from here all the way into the overworld and through the overworld and back through to the end and back up to this location takes exactly 450 game ticks. And 450 game ticks is a factor of 900 game ticks, and 900 game ticks is the exact time that the game does autosave, and it is very consistent. Since the entire conveyor belt is synchronized with the same timing as the game does its autosave, it is possible for the sand to be in the exact same location every time that a game autosave occurs. The downside to using such a system is that if the sand happens to be in an unstable state when an autosave occurs, it would possibly be always in that same state when the autosave occurs. But since the sand conveyor belt is synchronized with the autosave, if there does happen to be a sand in a vulnerable situation during the autosave will pause it, and then after the autosave is over, the sand will be set back in the game tick, and therefore it will continue afterwards. So then when the next autosave occurs, the sand will no longer be in that vulnerable situation, and instead it will be in a new position. And since it can take a couple autosaves to actually get a sand completely out of a vulnerable situation, that is why the timing is set to 50 game ticks per sand instead of 30 game ticks per sand. This little leniency allows the sand to not be able to get in a situation where it could cause the withers to shoot off blue wither skulls. Using this method where you synchronize the conveyor belt with the game's autosave, in conjunction with a autosave detector, it is possible for you to be able to predict where each sand will be during the course between 2 autosaves. With these 2 systems, it is possible for you to actually duplicate the max amount of sand per hour without having to worry about when the next autosave will be. I may make a video showing how this easily can be done. I tested the Sandcityr by running it 15 hours a day for a 3-week period, and during this time I never had any of the withers escape from the wither cages. So then I ran a second test on the Sandcityr, seeing if the wither cages could last over long periods of time. So I tried using a tick speed mod to increase the number of ticks that occur per second, and over long periods of time it seemed that the server could sometimes start falling behind. And at some point the server was behind like 130 seconds, and at that point the server decided to skip some ticks and end up skipping like 70 ticks, which is just over about 3 seconds. And as we know, that is enough time for the wither to actually think that he had lost target with his target over there, and he can actually start shooting blue wither skulls, or he can actually, even if he doesn't shoot blue wither skulls, he could think that he lost his target and he'll start to dance, which what I call dancing is when the wither thinks that he can find a new path to his target, he will try to move about, and this will allow him to actually walk over here into this section, and he can end up over here in this corner where he will not be able to escape but he may be able to destroy the sand and eventually stopping the sand generator. Even without a tick speed increase, it's possible for the server to lag behind and start skipping ticks. It's kind of difficult to understand why this happens or what was actually occurring when this happened, because usually the farm is running for 100 or 200 hours, so it's really impossible for me to actually watch when this was happening and see what actually occurred during that time. I have also added in a pressure plate here, and this is so that instead of you actually manually flipping this lever here, you can actually do the same method as I shown in my obsidian farm, where you can go up to the world build height, and then you can just drop an item down and you can activate this sequence. And this just prevents Endermen from spawning and messing up the main head targets and the side head targets, since you'll be far enough away so that none of the mobs can actually spawn down here. You don't have to worry about them interfering with your withers. All the materials that are produced out of this farm come down here and eventually go into this dropper that is right here. And this dropper just drops out the items as they come in, and this just goes into a ice water stream that eventually takes them all the way up and elevates them up here, and then they just get pushed in to the exit end portal, and they get pushed in with a little bit of momentum going in this direction, which is west. And this allows them to be able to get aligned and get sent in at the overworld properly. It's important that before you unload this chunk that you remove the sand from the system. So in this case I had 9 sand in the system. So you would want to remove them so that way the withers don't take any damage next time you come in. We are here in the overworld and we're at the spawn chunks. And this is the world spawn right here. And when the items get shot off, they have the momentum facing west. So then they bump up against this glass here and they get aligned and sent down into this water stream. And then the items will get aligned with these cakes and they'll get sent across these item sorters, and the obsidian will get pulled off here. And over here we have some spare extra sorters, and they're currently being used to take away the trapdoors and the stairs that come off of the sand cityr when you start it up. But you can switch those out and store sand and cobble if you want to. But otherwise it passes straight through, and the sand and cobble end up down here, and they get picked up by this hopper minecart, which takes them across and evenly distributes them across all these hoppers and furnaces. This is a pretty simple furnace array that I designed, and it just takes in fact that the only items that end up coming through here are the sand and the cobble, but you would probably want to just pull them out of their individual sorters here instead of this, using this method, because it could be a case that some other item gets put down here and doesn't get picked up from one of these sorters, or other case could be that the obsidian chest fills up and therefore they pass right on by and they end up down here, and this could break your furnace array. The amount of furnace I got here is equal to the same amount of output that the sand cityr puts out, and that's why it comes out almost exactly every time that the hopper minecart comes around. It pretty much fills up every single one of these. The other hopper minecart is the hopper minecart that is coming along and picking up the coal that we got from the wither grave, all the wither skeletons. And right here there's a system that just detects how much coal is in the hopper minecart, and if it reaches a certain limit then it just comes around and activates this fence gate here. Minecarts can be pretty buggy, and in this case this hopper minecart right here is actually being filled up from this hopper over here. So even though it's 1 meter away, it's still able to fill up this hopper minecart, and even if I stick a block there, you can still be able to fill it up. If I remove some of the items from here, he will stop here and he'll be able to get filled up from this hopper, even though it's 1 meter away. And this just does with the alignments of the hopper minecarts when they're on the rail, and sometimes this isn't the case, but I wish they would really fix their minecarts in the game. After the furnaces have smelted the items, they're just picked up with this hopper chain here, and they're just dispensed into these 2 droppers here, and they just drop out the items which go up this item elevator here and then just get sent back along so they can get picked up by these item sorters here. And we got room for quite a bit of cobble and some glass, and we got, you know, the other items too. and some extra room back here if you want to put in some spare items. Right here I just have this fence here. This just prevents items from glitching into the side of this cobble wall here and then bouncing out over here and therefore not getting picked up. Let's say the obsidian doesn't get picked up, then it comes through and passes by and then clogs the furnaces. Another thing to keep in mind is that in 1.8.3 they fixed the bug where that some items can clog up right beside each other and they'll pass by the hopper filters. So if you're operating this type of sorter in 1.8.1 or prior, it's possible that items will be able to just skip over these sorters and just end up at the end even though there is room to be taken in by the sorters. A lot of times I see people filling up containers very inefficiently, like while in creative. So the way you should be able to do it very easily is just get your item that you want to fill your chest up with and then just click it with your middle click, and then when you get to the first slot just click and hold your middle click and then drag it down all the columns and rows that you want it to fill up. And then once you're done filling up the chest, you can just release the middle click. And then once you get your chest full, then you just hold down control and then click with your middle click button again. And then you get a chest that's already full of the items. Because Beacon in the Box is made up of the 3 smaller farms, it is possible to run them individually. And they are fairly independent of each other. So you can run this in single player as well as multiplayer. The number of beacons that you can acquire from Beacon in a Box will vary very widely. This is because there's a lot of things that come into a factor when trying to figure out how the output is. It can be anywhere, depends on how fast you can collect your soul sand and how consistently you can find soul sand, all the way to how much lag your server can take and if it can actually run these farms at maximum speed. Because of changes that are made in 1.9, the farm as I shown here will not work in 1.9. I may try making this farm work for 1.9 in the future. So those are the changes that I made to the Sandcidiator, the Withergrave, and the Star Extractor, which allowed me to make Beacon in the Box. And when you're finished, you should have all 3 ingredients to make your beacons. You should have some glass, you should have some nether stars if you run the Star Extractor as well as Withergrave, and you should also have some obsidian here. In the description are links to all the videos that I have mentioned, as well as the world download to this world, so you can check it out and see how everything works. I had a lot of fun building Beacon in the Box, even though I probably spent more than 1,000 hours just turning this concept into a working farm. But now I'm excited to start on some other personal projects of mine. If you found this interesting, show me with a like. If you would like to see more crazy builds like this, subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to comment. Bye bye!